July 5th, 1943. The earth trembled beneath the weight of 6,000 German tanks rolling across the Russian steppe toward the Kursk salient. Hauptmann Friedrich Weber pressed his headphones closer to his ears, intercepting Soviet radio transmissions from his signals truck, positioned 3 kilometers behind the advancing Panzer spearhead. What he heard in those crackling voices made his blood run cold. The Russians knew everything, every tank position, every artillery coordinate, every planned avenue of advance. They were talking about German battle plans with the casual precision of men reading from a training manual. Weber's hand trembled as he reached for his field telephone to contact divisional headquarters. But then he stopped. In that moment of hesitation, with the sound of approaching Stukas drowning out his racing heartbeat and the acrid smell of diesel exhaust burning his nostrils, Weber faced an impossible choice. He could report what he'd discovered and watch thousands more die in a doomed offensive, or he could remain silent and let the German army's greatest gamble collapse under its own fatal contradictions. No one in the 4th Panzer Army knew that one man's decision in that cramped radio truck would validate what had already become inevitable months before the first shot was fired. Friedrich Weber had grown up in a small Bavarian village where his father ran the local post office and his mother taught at the elementary school. Born in 1915, he came of age during Germany's darkest economic years, watching his neighbors lose their farms and businesses while politicians in Berlin promised solutions that never came. Weber possessed an unusual gift for languages and mathematics that earned him a scholarship to study communications engineering at Munich University. His professors noted his ability to decode complex radio patterns and his intuitive understanding of signal propagation theory. When conscription came in 1939, Weber's technical skills landed him in the German Army Signals Intelligence Unit rather than the infantry line. His commanding officers quickly recognized his talent for intercepting and analyzing enemy communications. Weber could extract meaning from the faintest radio whispers and decode transmission patterns that baffled his colleagues. During the early campaigns in Poland and France, his intercepts had provided crucial tactical intelligence that helped German spearheads bypass enemy strongpoints and maintain their momentum. His fellow signals operators respected his methodical approach and unshakable calm under pressure. But Weber had begun to notice disturbing patterns in the intelligence he was gathering. Soviet radio discipline was improving dramatically with each passing month. Their codes were becoming more sophisticated, their deception operations more elaborate. Most troubling of all, Soviet forces seemed to anticipate German moves with uncanny accuracy. He had no idea that soon those instincts would be all that stood between thousands of German soldiers and annihilation. By the summer of 1943, the Eastern Front had evolved into a grinding war of attrition that bore no resemblance to the lightning campaigns of earlier years. The Battle of Stalingrad had ended in February with the destruction of an entire German army, while the siege of Leningrad continued to drain resources without achieving decisive results. German leadership and its high command had developed Operation Citadel as their answer to mounting strategic pressure from both the Soviet Union and the Western Allies. The plan called for a massive pincer attack against the Kursk salient, a bulge in Soviet lines that extended 150 kilometers westward into German-occupied territory. German intelligence estimated that successful elimination of the salient would destroy 40 Soviet divisions and create opportunities for renewed offensive operations toward Moscow or the Caucasus oil fields. German forces assembled nearly 1 million men, 2,700 tanks, and 1,800 aircraft for the assault. Tank crews received the newest Panther and Tiger tanks fresh from German factories, while assault divisions trained with updated tactical manuals emphasizing breakthrough operations against fortified positions, But Operation Citadel faced challenges that extended far beyond Soviet defensive capabilities. German production could no longer replace losses at the rate they were being sustained, while Soviet industrial output continued to increase month by month. More critically, German cryptographers had failed to recognize that their supposedly secure communications networks had been comprehensively penetrated by Soviet intelligence services. Every planning meeting, every supply requisition, every tactical adjustment was being transmitted directly to Moscow within hours of its occurrence. The mathematics of modern warfare were shifting decisively against Germany, but the German military leadership remained committed to achieving victory through superior tactical execution and technological innovation. Weber's first indication that something had gone fundamentally wrong came during the preliminary bombardments that began at 4:30 in the morning on July 5th. Soviet counter-battery fire began landing on German artillery positions within minutes of the opening salvos, targeting gun emplacements with precision that suggested direct observation rather than random defensive fire. As the morning progressed and German assault columns moved forward, Soviet resistance proved far more organized than intelligence estimates had predicted. The Russians had constructed defensive networks 3 lines deep, with anti-tank ditches, mine belts, and interlocking fields of fire that channeled German advances into carefully prepared killing zones. Weber monitored radio traffic between advancing tank commanders and heard increasing reports of unexpected obstacles, pre-registered artillery fire, and Soviet reserves appearing in locations where intelligence had reported empty terrain. Oberst Heinz Guderian's radio operator Feldwebel Klaus Richter transmitted a desperate request for close air support that revealed the true scope of the unfolding disaster. Enemy forces in position strength approximately 3 divisions, where reconnaissance reported company-level resistance. Request immediate Stuka support for breakthrough attempt toward Objective 773. Eidas. Weber cross-referenced Richter's coordinates with his intercept logs and discovered that Soviet forces had been discussing the placement of precisely those defensive units 48 hours earlier. Staff Sergeant Ivan Petrov's voice, speaking in accented German that suggested he might be a former German prisoner, had described anti-tank positions and artillery observers with the casual precision of someone reading from official deployment orders. Weber felt his stomach tighten as the implications became clear. The Russians weren't just intercepting German communications. They were monitoring them in real time and adjusting their defensive preparations accordingly. And then, as the afternoon sun climbed higher and German casualties mounted steadily, Weber heard something that made him question everything he thought he understood about the war. The transmission came through on a frequency that German intelligence had identified as a low-priority Soviet administrative channel used for supply coordination and routine personnel updates. Weber had been monitoring it primarily to track Soviet logistics patterns, but the conversation that crackled through his headphones at 1400 hours on July 5th contained information that no supply clerk should have possessed. 2 Soviet officers were discussing German tank formations with detailed knowledge of specific German army units, their commanders' names, and their planned objectives for the following day. Lieutenant Colonel Mikhail Volkov was explaining to Major Sergei Fedorov how elements of the 20th Panzer Division would attempt to breach Soviet lines near the village of Ponire, while the 3rd Panzer Division would simultaneously attack toward Olkovatka to create a diversionary threat. Volkov described the German plan with perfect accuracy, including tank numbers, artillery support assignments, and even the personal radio call signs of individual company commanders. Weber checked his own intelligence briefing materials and confirmed that every detail matched classified German operational orders that had been distributed less than 12 hours earlier. But the most chilling moment came when Volkov mentioned specific German casualties from that morning's fighting, including the names of tank commanders who had been killed or wounded in actions that were still being reported up through German command channels. The Soviets knew the results of German attacks before German headquarters had finished compiling their own battle reports. Weber realized he was listening to evidence of an intelligence penetration so complete that it rendered German tactical security meaningless. Soviet forces weren't just prepared for German attacks, they possessed detailed advanced knowledge of German capabilities, intentions, and even real-time battle damage assessments. As Weber continued monitoring Soviet communications throughout the afternoon, he began to understand that Operation Citadel had been compromised from its earliest planning stages. The offensive that was supposed to restore German initiative on the Eastern Front was unfolding exactly as Soviet commanders had anticipated it would. Every German advance was being channeled into pre-planned defensive positions. Every tactical innovation was being countered by prepared responses, and every successful breakthrough was being sealed by reserves that had been positioned specifically to deal with German penetrations. He thought it was over, but destiny wasn't done with him yet. The scope of the intelligence disaster became fully apparent to Weber during the evening hours of July 5th, as he compiled his daily intercept summary for transmission to Army Group Center headquarters. Soviet radio operators were discussing German losses, supply shortages, and tactical modifications with the clinical detachment of men analyzing an academic exercise rather than fighting for their lives. Major General Pavel Rotmistrov's communication staff was coordinating defensive adjustments based on German radio intercepts that included verbatim quotes from German field commanders. Colonel Dmitry Lelyushenko's tank crews were receiving targeting assignments that incorporated real-time German vehicle movements, fuel consumption rates, and ammunition expenditure data. Most disturbing of all, Soviet artillery observers were adjusting their fire missions using German grid coordinates and range calculations that had been transmitted in supposedly secure German Army communication channels. Weber documented 17 separate instances where Soviet forces demonstrated advanced knowledge of German tactical decisions that had been made less than 4 hours earlier. The mathematical impossibility of such comprehensive intelligence penetration suggested systematic compromise at the highest levels of German command structure. Weber faced a moral crisis that extended far beyond military regulations or loyalty oaths. He could report his discoveries and potentially save German lives by exposing the security breach, but doing so would also allow German forces to adjust their communications procedures and potentially extend a war that was already causing massive casualties on both sides. Alternatively, he could remain silent and allow the offensive to continue on its predetermined path toward failure, knowing that German defeat at Kursk might shorten the overall conflict and ultimately save more lives than continued resistance. The decision tormented him throughout the night of July 5th as German tank crews prepared for another day of attacks against defensive positions that had been designed specifically to defeat them. Weber understood that his choice would affect thousands of men who trusted their commanders to provide accurate intelligence and secure communications. But he also recognized that the war itself had evolved beyond any possibility of German victory, and that prolonging the conflict would only multiply the suffering on all sides. Weber's decision crystallized at dawn on July 6th. When intercepted, Soviet communications revealed preparations for a massive counteroffensive that would dwarf anything German forces had encountered since the opening days of Operation Barbarossa. Marshal Georgy Zhukov's staff was coordinating the movement of entire tank armies toward assembly areas south and north of the Kursk salient, positioning forces for encirclement operations that would trap German spearheads in a cauldron similar to Stalingrad. The scale of Soviet preparations indicated months of advanced planning and suggested that Operation Citadel had been anticipated and planned for since its earliest conceptual stages. Soviet forces weren't simply responding to German attacks, they were implementing a comprehensive strategy designed to transform German offensive operations into a decisive Soviet victory. Weber realized that reporting his intercepts would only provide German commanders with information they could use to withdraw their forces and preserve them for future operations that would prolong the war indefinitely. Instead of filing his standard intelligence report, Weber submitted a routine technical summary that described Soviet radio traffic as normal administrative communications, with no tactical significance. He documented his intercepts in his personal logs, but classified them at the lowest possible security level, ensuring that they would receive minimal distribution and analysis. The decision required Weber to falsify official reports and violate his oath as a German officer, but he justified his actions by calculating that German defeat at Kursk would demonstrate the futility of continued resistance and encourage negotiated settlement rather than total destruction. Weber spent the morning of July 6th monitoring German tactical communications and listening to increasingly desperate requests for reinforcements, air support, and intelligence updates from commanders who could not understand why their carefully planned attacks were being systematically defeated by enemies who seemed to possess supernatural awareness of German intentions. Oberst Friedrich von Mellenthin radioed from his command tank that Soviet defensive fire was landing on German positions within seconds of their occupation, suggesting direct observation from concealed positions that had somehow escaped German reconnaissance. Hauptmann Ernst Bolz reported that his assault company had encountered anti-tank obstacles precisely positioned to channel German attacks into interlocking fields of fire that had been pre-registered by Soviet artillery observers. Weber documented each transmission while maintaining his silence about the intelligence sources that explained Soviet defensive effectiveness. He was participating in the systematic destruction of German offensive capability through deliberate withholding of crucial intelligence, but he convinced himself that his actions would ultimately serve the greater good by hastening the end of a war that Germany could no longer win. The climax of Weber's moral crisis came on July 7th, when German forces achieved a tactical breakthrough near the village of Prokhorovka that temporarily offered hope for operational success. Elements of the 2nd German Armored Corps had penetrated Soviet defensive lines and established a salient that threatened to split Soviet forces defending the southern face of the Kursk salient. Weber intercepted frantic Soviet communications describing emergency redeployment of reserves and urgent requests for additional tank destroyer units to seal the German penetration. For approximately 6 hours, German tank commanders reported steady advances against weakening resistance, while Soviet radio traffic suggested genuine confusion and defensive improvisation rather than predetermined responses. Weber faced the most difficult decision of his life, as he realized that accurate reporting of Soviet communications might provide German commanders with intelligence they needed to exploit their breakthrough and achieve significant tactical success. He spent the afternoon crafting 2 separate intelligence reports. The first was an accurate summary of Soviet defensive weaknesses and reserve movements that could enable German forces to expand their penetration and potentially achieve the breakthrough that Operation Citadel had been designed to accomplish. The second was a sanitized version that described Soviet communications as routine administrative traffic with minimal tactical value. Weber stared at both documents for nearly an hour, understanding that his choice would directly influence the fate of thousands of German and Soviet soldiers fighting around Prokhorovka. The accurate report might extend German offensive capability and prolong the war, while the false report would allow Soviet forces to organize effective countermeasures that would seal the breakthrough and ensure German defeat. Weber chose to submit the sanitized report, knowing that his decision represented a fundamental betrayal of his oath as a German officer, but believing that it served a higher moral purpose by hastening the end of a conflict that was destroying European civilization. He destroyed the accurate intelligence summary and watched through his periscope as German tanks continued their advance toward objectives they would never reach. Supported by artillery coordinates that were being transmitted directly to Soviet defensive positions through compromised communication channels that Weber had deliberately chosen not to expose. The immediate consequences of Weber's decision became apparent during the massive tank battle that developed around Prokhorovka on July 8th, when Soviet reserve forces launched coordinated counterattacks that destroyed German penetrations and established conditions for broader offensive operations. Weber monitored German communications throughout the day and heard increasingly desperate reports from tank commanders who could not understand why their attacks were being systematically defeated by enemies who seemed to anticipate every tactical movement. Oberst Hyacinth Graf Strachwitz radioed that his regiment had lost 47 tanks to anti-tank fire from positions that had appeared empty during reconnaissance flights conducted less than 3 hours earlier. Major Johann Einzela reported that his assault battalion had been caught in pre-registered artillery fire that began landing within minutes of their movement toward assigned objectives, suggesting Soviet observation capabilities that exceeded anything German intelligence had anticipated. Weber cross-referenced these reports with his intercepts of Soviet communications and confirmed that Red Army forces were receiving detailed intelligence updates about German movements, casualties, and tactical modifications in real time. German forces were fighting against an enemy who possessed comprehensive advanced knowledge of German capabilities and intentions, making tactical success virtually impossible regardless of equipment quality or individual soldier effectiveness. Weber documented German losses throughout the day while maintaining his silence about the intelligence sources that explained Soviet defensive superiority. By evening on July 8th, German forces around Prokhorovka had suffered casualties that effectively terminated their offensive capability, while Soviet reserves continued to arrive from staging areas whose locations Weber had identified but chosen not to report. The mathematical reality of the Eastern Front had asserted itself with decisive finality. Germany lacked the industrial capacity, manpower reserves, and strategic depth necessary to sustain offensive operations against an enemy who possessed both material superiority and comprehensive intelligence advantages. Weber's individual decision to withhold crucial intelligence had contributed to this outcome, but he understood that German defeat at Kursk was inevitable, regardless of his personal actions. The war itself had evolved beyond any possibility of German victory, and his choice had simply hastened recognition of strategic realities that German leadership had refused to acknowledge. Weber's post-war life reflected the complex moral dimensions of his wartime decision and its long-term consequences for both his personal development and broader historical understanding. After spending 18 months in Soviet captivity following Germany's surrender in May 1945, Weber returned to Bavaria and resumed his career in communications engineering. He married his childhood sweetheart Anna in 1947 and raised 3 children while working for the West German Postal Service. Weber never discussed his wartime experiences with his family or colleagues, carrying the burden of his decision in solitude for more than 4 decades. His personnel files from the post-war period describe him as a conscientious employee who demonstrated exceptional technical skill but avoided leadership positions that would have advanced his career more rapidly. Anna later wrote in her diary that Friedrich seemed haunted by memories he could not share, often waking at night and staring out their bedroom window toward the east. Weber's former German army colleagues who survived the war and maintained contact with him noted his reluctance to participate in veterans' reunions or discussions about Eastern Front operations. Feldwebel Klaus Richter, who had served as Oberst Guderian's radio operator during the Kursk offensive, wrote to Weber in 1963 expressing gratitude for intelligence support that had helped his unit avoid encirclement during the Soviet counteroffensive. Richter's letter revealed that he attributed his survival to timely warnings about Soviet troop movements that had actually been based on intelligence that Weber had chosen not to report to higher headquarters. The irony of receiving gratitude for actions he had deliberately avoided taking deepened Weber's sense of moral complexity about his wartime decisions. Weber spent his retirement years studying post-war historical analyses of the Battle of Kursk, seeking validation for choices he had made under conditions of extreme moral pressure. He collected dozens of books and articles about Eastern Front operations, annotating them with marginal notes that revealed his intimate knowledge of German communications procedures and Soviet intelligence capabilities. His personal library included memoirs by Soviet commanders who described their advanced knowledge of German battle plans, as well as German accounts that acknowledged the comprehensive intelligence failures that had doomed Operation Citadel from its inception. The broader historical significance of Weber's decision emerged gradually through post-war intelligence revelations and scholarly research that documented the extent of Soviet penetration into German communication networks during the summer of 1943. Declassified documents revealed that the Lucy Ring spy network, operating from Switzerland, had provided Moscow with detailed advance warning about Operation Citadel's objectives, timing, and force composition. Additional intelligence sources, including signals intercepts and human assets within German Army command structure, had given Soviet planners months to prepare defensive networks specifically designed to defeat German offensive tactics. The Battle of Kursk represented the culmination of Soviet intelligence superiority that had been developing throughout the war, but reached decisive effectiveness during the summer of 1943. Weber's individual decision to withhold tactical intelligence had contributed to this outcome, but post-war analysis demonstrated that German defeat was virtually inevitable regardless of any single individual's actions. Soviet forces possessed overwhelming material advantages, superior strategic position, and comprehensive intelligence capabilities that rendered German tactical innovations ineffective. German forces' failure to achieve breakthrough operations at Kursk marked the definitive end of German offensive capability on the Eastern Front and established conditions for sustained Soviet operations that would continue until Germany's unconditional surrender 22 months later. Weber's choice to prioritize ending the war quickly over preserving German tactical security had proven historically justified, though he could not have known this with certainty at the time he made his decision. Historical scholarship has validated his assessment that prolonging German resistance would only have multiplied casualties without affecting the war's ultimate outcome. Modern military historians studying the Battle of Kursk have identified it as the decisive turning point that demonstrated Germany's inability to achieve strategic objectives through tactical superiority alone, while simultaneously revealing Soviet evolution into a military power capable of sustained offensive operations against fortified positions defended by experienced troops equipped with advanced technology. Weber's story illustrates the profound moral complexities faced by individuals caught between competing loyalties during total war, while demonstrating how single decisions made under extreme pressure can align with broader historical forces to influence outcomes far beyond their immediate tactical significance. His choice to withhold intelligence that might have prolonged German resistance reflected intuitive understanding of strategic realities that German leadership refused to acknowledge, even when confronted with overwhelming evidence of operational failure. The Battle of Kursk proved that technological innovation and tactical excellence could not compensate for fundamental deficiencies in industrial capacity, manpower reserves, and strategic depth when confronting an enemy who possessed both material superiority and comprehensive intelligence advantages. Weber recognized these mathematical realities before his superiors did and acted accordingly, despite personal costs that would affect him for the remainder of his life. His decision represents the intersection between individual moral choice and historical inevitability. showing how personal courage can manifest through recognition of larger truths rather than blind adherence to institutional loyalties. The question that emerged from Weber's wartime experience extends beyond military history to fundamental issues of moral responsibility during periods of national crisis. When institutional loyalty conflicts with broader moral obligations, how should individuals weigh their personal commitments against potential consequences for society as a whole? Weber answered this question by choosing what he believed would minimize overall suffering, even though his choice required betraying oaths he had sworn to uphold and abandoning colleagues who trusted him to provide accurate intelligence. His decision proved historically correct, but the moral burden of his choice shaped his entire post-war life and influenced his understanding of duty, loyalty, and personal responsibility in ways that extended far beyond his military service. Would you have broken the order to remain silent or reported intelligence that might have prolonged a war that was already lost? Comment below and share this story, so others remember that sometimes the greatest courage lies in recognizing when resistance serves no purpose beyond pride, and that true heroism may require accepting moral complexity rather than seeking simple answers to impossible choices.